So Sean Peterson is a sixth-generation farmer who has worked in many different aspects of the food system as a waiter, a dishwasher, wholesale food distributor, farmers market manager, baker, restaurant owner, and of course, a farmer. He currently serves as the founder and director of the Association of Gleaning Organizations, an effort that builds the capacity of organizations recovering fresh fruits and vegetables from farms, gardens, and backyards across North America by engaging communities to harvest surplus produce. So we welcome Sean, and let's get him spotlighted if we can.
Hi all. It's great to be
There
here.
you are. Hello.
Can you hear me? Is this all working well? Great.
We can hear you, Sean.
Perfect. I'm on my phone today, so my computer crashed just before this, and so just doing a little on the fly, but I'm excited to be here and excited to be with you. As mentioned, my name's Sean. I'm the founding member of the Association of Gleaning Organizations. Do you want to throw up my first slide for me here? Great. So I think it'd be helpful just to share a little bit about myself and a little bit about the Association of Gleaning Organizations. As was mentioned, I'm a sixth-generation farmer. I grew up working on my grandparents' dairy farm. I ran my own small vegetable production farm for several years, and I raised heritage turkeys. I've raised laying hens, and I had a vast array of experience in the food systems work. I ran and managed an artisan bakery for many years. I owned a restaurant. I've managed farmers markets. And in 2011, I decided I wanted to move away from food and farming and restaurants and do something more with that provided a little bit more meaning and allowed more people to have access to fresh quality food. So at that moment, I started an organization called the Green Urban Lunchbox, which started with converting a 35-foot school bus into a mobile greenhouse. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to get people to think about where their food came from, start having interesting conversations about food, and provide better access to food to folks who didn't have access to it. And one of the programs that grew out of that was an urban gleaning program. So we would go out and harvest people's unused trees in their backyard. And we inherited this program. We were running another program that helped people put gardens in low-income seniors' backyards, and then man those gardens with college kids who were learning how to garden. And our city approached us, the city of Salt Lake, and they said, "Hey, we think you know how to work in people's yards. We started this program and we don't know what to do with it." And what they would do is go out and harvest people's unused fruit trees in their backyards and donate that food. And so I quickly began to think, well, there must be other people doing this work. And what we found was a really fractured space of everyone seemed to be reinventing the wheel. And I'm sure that's not that uncommon for folks in food rescue to feel that same way, especially, in the early 2010s. And so we knew that we needed to learn from other gleaners, and we needed to find a way to bring those organizations together. So we started hosting an annual conference called the International Gleaning Symposium in 2017. And the work of the association grew out of that as members wanted to come together and find ways to share ideas. They formed an association, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But I think it's important for this group to understand how we define gleaning or who we focus on working with. And we focus on working with folks who harvest food directly from a plant or get the food directly from someone who did harvest it. So that may look like going out and harvesting in a farm field. It may, harvesting from a community garden. It may be backyard trees, or maybe a farmer's market rescue. And many of our members do all of these things. Can I get those of you whose camera's on, if you've done gleaning before, as I just described it, would you raise your hand? Or even push the raise hand button? That helps me understand who I'm speaking to. To see some of our members on here, which is awesome. Yeah. So a few of you have done it. I'm just going to run through why we really feel gleaning is important. Will you take us to the next slide? So, fresh produce is the #2 requested food item in pantries, just behind dairy. But I don't know about all of you, but I've actually spent some of my life receiving food from food pantries. And, this was in the mid-2000s. And I'll tell you, the produce that I mostly saw looked like this. It was sort of browning bananas. There's maybe a few cucumbers and a few other things, but the selection was really small. But if that's the #1 thing that people are requesting, our pantry is able to meet that. And I don't know how many of you do food distribution as well as food rescue, but you might find that this is the case as well. And we know that those who can't or don't eat fresh and fruits and vegetables are subject to a whole host of health health challenges, from increased risk of diabetes to cancer to obesity and all of that. And luckily, in the last few years, we've seen an influx of produce into pantries, especially as we came out of the COVID era. And many of our members begin to ask themselves, will gleaning even be needed anymore? There's so much produce. But what I think all of you probably know as well is that sometimes government's memory is really short. And now, as cuts have happened to these programs and cuts to SNAP and other increase in pantries, again, our membership are reporting a lack of fresh produce in pantries. And the other way that gleaning really can help is oftentimes we end up serving pantries that just don't do well with the large distribution from the regional food bank. And I'm sure many of you in your food rescue will see this too, is, many of them don't have refrigeration, they don't have large storage, they may distribute just 1 or 2 days a week, and they can't take a pallet full of apples, or they can't take a pallet full of cucumbers. But gleaned produce and our gleaning members are able to serve them in a way that fits their needs. So those are some of the reasons why we feel that gleaning is important. Will you take me to my next slide? And you'll have to help me with the chat because I'm on my phone, so they just sort of flash for a second. But the other thing is that what we don't understand is how the amount of produce that gets wasted on farms. If you look at Refred's slide here, it's 16 million tons. Outside of homes, that's very shortly behind commercial establishments of 8 million tons. But there's a couple things that happen in there, and that's a really diverse field that includes a ton of subcategories. But the other thing is, what we know about this 16 million tons is it's a vast undercount of produce left on farms. So this number comes because USDA sent a notice to farmers, it's been almost 20 years now. And what they said to farmers is they said, can you estimate how much food is left in your field? And I have been a farmer, and I only had like a 2.5 acre vegetable production farm. And I had no idea what's left in that field. I'm mostly focused on getting things out to harvest, filling it under so I can replant. And I had no idea. And so studies have been done to say, well, was this a good number? And what they found is it's about a 50% undercount. And you'll see some of the studies has found, like 40% of tomatoes in Florida are left in the field. Lettuce is 56%. New Jersey found that, 40% of peaches were left in the field. Cucumbers sometimes will be as high as 70%. So this is at least 10 billion tons of produce that's grown and never harvested. And there's a tremendous amount of resources that happen here. And yeah, 50% is a crazy, crazy number. And there's a whole host of reasons why this is left in the field. But what we know is it's not the brown bananas that you see, or it's not the stuff that's sort of expired. The majority of this produce is in its peak ripeness. It's often left behind because of sizing issue. So, I've picked through cucumber fields that were machine picked for pickles, and every cucumber bigger than pickles is just thrown out of the machine and thrown back into the field. So those are your grocery store size cucumbers. I've also picked through grocery store style cucumber fields with, hundreds of grocery store style, thousands of pounds of grocery store style cucumbers left behind, but also tons of pickling sized cucumbers left behind, and all those sort of odd shapes, or it's left behind because of changes in the market. So it's estimated that 50% of the cherry harvest in Oregon was not harvested this year. And we have members who went to fields that hadn't been harvested at all, where, tree after tree is loaded in cherries. Why weren't the cherries harvested this year? Because climate change caused the cherries in California to ripen late and the cherries in Oregon and Washington to ripen early, which resulted in all the cherries ripening at the same time, which meant there was no market for those cherries. In addition to that, the field workers who typically pick cherries start in California and work their way into Washington, but they were all still in California because the cherries had ripened late, and so there was no one to pick them. So there's this tremendous amount of waste that's happening in the fields. And as you're thinking about your other sources, we believe that farms is the largest source of waste out there, and it is probably much larger than the 16 million tons, and could provide a tremendous amount of produce for those who are working within your community. So let's shift focus here for a second, and we'll talk about who's actually doing gleaning. So we currently have a database of about 286 organizations across North America. We primarily in Canada and the US. We don't, oh, thank you. We don't work with organizations in Mexico only because we don't know of any. We'd love to see some gleaning happen there and start to work with them. We found that about 18% of these organizations are associated with a food bank and are run as a portion of that. But the vast majority are not solo gleaning organizations. They're organizations who do some other sort of community service programming, that may be some housing or homelessness. They may be like a full wraparound services, like one of our members in Washington who not only does field gleaning, but they run a thrift store, and they provide housing assistance, and they provide legal aid to farm workers, and they provide food distribution on their own and do some work in schools. So there's the wide variety of this. But most of these programs are really, really small. There's about 50% have less than one FTE who's dedicated to gleaning. So in the larger organizations, this usually gets tacked on to someone else's role. It may be a food rescue coordinator who's also doing some gleaning in the summer, or someone who does, campus food recovery. And then in the down season, they'll do some gleaning. Or they may have be a volunteer coordinator who does this. And, while less than 50% of our members have 0.5 FTE, they actually skew much to the smaller side, with someone who's just doing this a few hours a week. And their budgets are really, really small. Tons of them are running gleaning programs on under $10,000 a year. And, the 50% is less than 30,000. And these are really heavily volunteer led organizations. Take me to my next slide. So one of the reasons I think that more food rescue organizations should be doing gleaning is because there's a lot of overlap. What's needed for a successful program? So let's take a step back. Typically what will happen is the gleaning organization will reach out to either a farmer or homeowner and let them know that they're available to glean. And they may ask, what do you have coming up? And that farmer will reach back and say, hey, next Wednesday I have a filled full of watermelons that you could glean. I have to fill them on the 15th, but if you get here before then, after my harvest on Wednesday, you can glean as many watermelons as you want. And then that farmer will reach out, or that organization will reach out to their volunteer base, find a way to, decide how many volunteers they're going to take out. They'll go out with the volunteers, they'll harvest, they'll, load it up, and then they'll distribute it. And we can talk a bit. Distribution happens in a ton of different ways. Sometimes it's the food banks actually coming out and getting it. Sometimes it's the volunteers distributing it. Sometimes it's going back into your food rescue distribution channels and it's being distributed. So, the average organization has about 150 unique individuals who come out and volunteer a year. And many of you probably have this volunteer base who maybe would, be interested in an additional or a different use of volunteers. In case you think that this is a young man's game, the primary group of volunteers in Gleaning organization are retired women over 50. So it's not necessarily a young man's game, but it is hard physical labor, that's for sure. And then you need a location to glean, right? So you need a backyard, a farmer's market, or a farm. And we find that successful organizations don't need a ton of farms. I was just talking to a member of ours in Western Massachusetts. They work with just 4 farms, and they do 3 gleans every week on just those 4 farms. And most of our organizations find just a couple farms that they build strong relationships with. And you may say to yourself, well, do I have large enough farms in my community? Most of the farms that are gleaned from are under 5 acres. Over 50% of farms that we glean from are under 5 acres. I don't remember the exact statistic off the top of my head, but, and many of those farms that are just a few acres can support weekly glean. If you think back to this amount of produce we talked about, it's most of our gleaning organizations, they don't glean all the produce available to them because they just run out of time and volunteers or places to distribute it. Very rarely that we run into organizations whose struggle is finding enough produce to glean, is finding the other resources. I shared a cucumber story a little bit. I talked a lot about cucumbers on this call. But I had the chance to glean some cucumbers in Florida a few years ago. And we picked 20,000 pounds of cucumbers in 2 hours from just maybe half an acre. And we could have picked another probably 40,000 pounds of cucumbers in that field. We just ran out of places to put them and someone to take them. So you don't need a ton of farms. You just need a few to sort of help you work through this. And then you need somewhere to take it. Our members actually distribute to a ton of locations. As I mentioned earlier, we typically end up serving really small pantries, the ones that are in church basements or in schools or on college campuses, the places that are just distributing a few places each year, or a few times each week. And so, I left this last point that gleaning is largely about logistics. That's what we find as people get into gleaning. Their big thing is like, what are the, if they end up spending most of their time figuring out how to get volunteers in time to a farm, how to get the food distributed. And, I've done some food rescue work in the past with my organization in Salt Lake. And what I found with food rescue is it's largely logistics as well. And if you're good at logistics, you'll be really, really great at gleaning. So will you take me to my next slide? Just have a couple more things. So here we have our member organizations in the Northeast. And then if you'll take me one more slide deep. These are our members in New York. And this comes from the National Gleaning Project.org, which is by the CAF Center at Vermont Law School. It's a partnership between our organization and them. And so some of these organizations who have dropped a pin on here maybe don't quite fit our definition of gleaning. But what you can see is that there's really sparse coverage in New York. There are a ton of areas with very few gleaning organizations. You know, for example, Vermont has almost triple the gleaning organizations that New York has. And our friends in Washington State, where we're doing a lot of work right now, have 35 gleaning organizations. So there is definitely space in the market, and the market is not saturated in your communities for gleaning. You take me one last slide and then we can go to questions. I think I'm supposed to do the questions here in just a few more minutes. So we have a ton of resources available at AGO to help you think about a gleaning organization. One of the ways to think about gleaning and learn more about it is we have a 2020 gleaning census that's on our website, which is gleaningorgs.com. We have the National Gleaning Project.org that you just saw the map from. This has a ton of legal resources for farmers, starter packs that we've developed. You can actually find the gleaning census on there as well. You'll find a ton of tools and resources there. If it's printed, we decided to house it there. And then you have our organization. We host monthly coffee chats that are open to anyone who would like to attend. These are informal chances to learn about all sorts of different topics, from fundraising to volunteering to anything that you would want to learn about. We offer coaching with myself. If you're starting a gleaning organization, this is a free service we offer. You reach out to me and have numerous calls where we can talk through some of your issues. We have a formal mentorship program where you end up paired with a mentor for 12 weeks and gets thrown into a cohort with others who are building gleaning programs. You get a chance to learn about the fundamentals of building the program, learn from others' mistakes, and really work with a seasoned expert in the field. We actually also run several other peer learning programs. And then all our coffee chats and our symposium resources are also listed on the website. Our 2024 symposium will be held May 1st through 3rd in Seattle, Washington. And we move that every year. We were in Milwaukee last year. We were in Florida the year before. We try to make that accessible. We offer scholarships to small organizations to attend. And we really try to have great attendance there, and it's also online, and it's available for free online if you need that scholarship as well. So my email's on the bottom there. You're welcome to reach out to me, and I would love to chat with you about how gleaning might fit in your organization. I say, while I have about 15 years of gleaning experience, I can connect you to folks who have 30 or 40 years. And then that's really what I do is I'll find someone in our membership base who's willing to talk to you about the specifics of your programming and really help you build that programming. So I would love to take questions. Yeah. I
Thank you,
can't really
Sean.
see the chat. So
Yeah,
if there's any in the chat, will you read them?
I'll help you out there with that. No problem at all. So we have a question about the cost. What is the cost of the program? So I'm thinking either to start a gleaning program or just to sort of sustain a gleaning program.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really hard thing for me to put a number on, because our membership base, we did this 2020 gleaning census I mentioned earlier. And what we found was that budget had little to do with the amount of food recovered. There's so many factors in here. Your main cost is your staffing and your insurance coverage, but many food rescue organizations are already covering these. And then I would say your other significant infrastructure cost is either food storage, but I would say about 40% of our membership base uses no food storage. They do direct distribution straight out. And then trucks are a way to move the produce. And so if you already have those in yours, you can add a gleaning program for very little cost. It's mostly staffing time. I will say our cost per pound recovered for the typical gleaning organization, again, ranges across the board from as low as 6 cents a pound. And we only use cost per pound of organizations with paid staff. I'll say that. We have a ton of volunteer organizations, and it's just impossible to figure that cost per pound. But it ranges anywhere from 7 cents a pound of food recovered and distributed, all the way up to like $3 a pound. But the majority of our organizations are just below 50 cents a pound.
Thank
Does
you,
that
Sean.
help? I don't know whose question that was, but if you know you want some more clarification on that, I'm happy to chat about it.
We'll make sure everybody has Sean's email as well. So we do have another question. This one's from Martha. How successful are your members in hiring seasonal staff for gleaning?
Yeah, it is a big challenge, you know. The seasonal staff are always a big challenge. Um, I think, I mean, most of our members manage to do it. I know that it's something we talk about with them all the time. Many of them try to find, especially in larger organizations, once they, sort of have grown beyond, or are part of a larger organization, they try to find a role that fits. So like I have a gleaning coordinator who does gleaning, and the season for them in Washington runs from early spring, from like March-ish to middle of October, 1st of November. And then she manages all the holiday food distribution at the pantry. And that takes her through into January. And then she does some logistical stuff and the rest of that, but it helps sort of manage and fill out that season for them. But seasonal staff is tough. This is one of the big challenges of gleaning. We also, found that more and more of our members get into what, like post-harvest food rescue. And one of the things gleaning does is it leads to a significant amount of additional fresh produce harvest. Because farmers get to really know you. They see you on the farm. And so then when they have those, couple crates of winter squash that they're not going to go in their winter CSA anymore, or their winter markets are done, or whatever it is, they'll reach out to you, or they'll reach out to you for the carrots that they ended up digging up later in the season, and they'll go to you. And we, it's not untypical for our members to recover as much produce from post-harvest rescue as they do in glean, but most of them will say that those relationships would not have happened had they not first been gleaning on the farm.
Thank you. And thank you, Melissa, for reminding me that you popped in a question a little bit earlier on that I missed. So I'm going to go back to that. And this question says, my organization specifically rescues and distributes chef prepared food into individual meals, already cooked protein, starch, and a veggie. We do not currently have an operation that could prepare glean produce from its raw form into prepared form. But how would you suggest incorporating gleaning into a model like the one that we have?
Yeah, so we have a whole handful of members who do actually pre-glean that produce, and then it often will go to like homeless shelters or soup kitchens, and it will be prepped that way. We have some members who also distribute it into chefs who will then, turn around and process that into food with them, or have, a program that processes it. Glean, especially ugly produce is a really good candidate to supplement programs that are cooking food. It sounds like with that program, they're mostly recovering that fresh food. I would also say, if you did have glean produce, throwing an apple or, a couple, ready to eat type produce in with those delivered meals might be a really nice addition.
Thank you. All right, this is from Ileani. What challenges do gleaning organizations commonly face, and how does your association support them in overcoming these obstacles?
Yeah, I think in most nonprofit or food rescue organizations, this is a really common challenge, is that they're just under-resourced. So I think one of the ways we support them is by, helping them not reinvent the wheel. learning from others' past mistakes. Um, our members struggle with fundraising. And so one of the programs we've had tremendous amount of success with is our peer review grant program. So we started this program with the idea that it would promote idea sharing in the Gleaning community. So if you have a grant application that, especially if you're new to grant writing or a small organization and you need someone to read it, you send it to us and then one of our members reads it. We pay the member to read it and offer feedback, and then that feedback comes back to you. We helped our membership base raise $750,000 last year with that program, and much of it would not have gone into these Gleaning organizations. It really helped get them significant feedback, but it also helped them share ideas, and learn what other Gleaning programs are doing that you may want to incorporate in your community. We've explored some admin support and things like that. It's not really something that's fitting our model right now, but there definitely is a need for that as well. One of the other things we've been able to do is the best way to recruit farmers is from a farmer recommendation. So especially with large farmers, some of our gleaners, it's easy to meet a small scale farmer if you go to a farmer's market or something like that. And I'll actually recommend to, if you're starting an on-farm gleaning program in a community, that you just start doing farmers market rescue and you go to the market and you show consistency every week and you'll meet some. But with larger farmers, it's harder. So one of the things we've been able to do is connect with larger farmers who are already in a gleaning organization in another part of the country and ask them for a recommendation for a farmer in, say New Jersey that's doing large scale production who maybe would benefit from gleaning, because farmers are really likely to let you onto their farm to glean if another farmer recommends it, as opposed to some, Yahoo that just came off the street. So.
Thank you. We have a question from Jesse. Are there gleaning programs in other parts of the country that have incorporated ways to help compensate smaller scale farmers in some way for the food that's being gleaned?
So there is a tremendous amount of legal red tape that makes it really hard to compensate farmers for food that has been gleaned. It mostly violates farm labor law. And the risk isn't to the gleaning organization, it's to the farmer. And if a farmer were injured doing a glean or something like that, it could really, the farmer was being paid for the produce, could really cause some significant financial damage to that farmer. But what we do find is that gleaning programs do find ways to support farmers. So oftentimes if they're in a food bank, they maybe have a budget that purchases produce as well. So many times how our members get food from farmers is they do infield glean for the time that farmers don't have the resources to pick it. They purchase produce that's seconds that the farmers may have for their food bank distribution. And they get, post-harvested seconds from the farmers. So they can sometimes be a little bit messy relationships, but it does help and support the farmers. The other way we find that gleaners support their local small farmers is by promoting their businesses, putting people out on the farm, promoting them in their social media. All the rest of that is as people who donate to their program and as donors really sort of helps raise their profile in the community. And then probably the most unique way I've seen this done is we had an organization in Colorado who for a few years ran what they called a mobile farm workforce. And they would occasionally use that workforce to glean produce that they needed, but they also would make that workforce available to hire at a reasonable cost to the farmers who maybe just needed, 2 days worth of labor to get their pumpkins in or something like that, and they could utilize this. Like I said, the majority of our gleaners work with really small farmers. And so that relationship becomes really connected, and our gleaners struggle to not do things for farmers, like not weed for them or not do that. There are some things, like as they're picking cucumbers, they maybe will pull the vines or something like that to make it easier for the farmer to till them in. But but as far as paying farmers for green produce, if volunteer labor is used for that, there's some significant legal risk.
Jesse sends his thanks, Sean. I don't know if you can see see the chat box, but he says thank you. And we have like a moment for another question or two. So I actually have a question if you wouldn't mind entertaining it. So I heard you talk a lot about gleaning at farms, and it's sort of what I'm familiar with when I think of gleaning is going to, farms, but you also mentioned farmers markets. So I'm wondering if there's any sort of different or outside of the box areas that people are technically, like your members are gleaning at, just so that we're expanding our idea of what gleaning could mean. Is it community gardens is a possibility? What are maybe some of the other ways?
Yeah, so a large portion of or a large subset of our membership base are what we call our urban gleaners, and they primarily focus on fruit trees in people's backyards or fruits and vegetables from their gardens. Usually, if it's fruits and vegetables from the gardens, it's more like a post-harvest rescue from the homeowner. So like we had a member who set up drop boxes in their community where people could bring all their garden excess, and then someone would drive around every month or every week and pick that up on a set day, and take all those to the food bank. But significant amounts of produce can come off of backyard trees. We've had, I ran an urban gleaning program, and we'd rescue 40, 50, 60,000 pounds of produce in a year from just people's backyards trees. And that's, 2 or 3 months of harvesting. Some backyard fruit trees will yield 5, 6, 700 pounds of fresh fruit. And so there's significant amount of food that's going to waste in our urban tree canopies. And gleaners are actually helping preserve those urban tree canopies, because most of those were planted by previous homeowners, and they were planted when they produced 30 pounds of apples, not 600. And it becomes a significant waste. Some of our members actually get funding to do bear mitigation in high bear areas, in parts of Colorado or up in Montana or even in British Columbia, where, those fruit trees dropping hundreds of pounds of fruit in your backyard would draw the bears in the urban area. And so what they can do to help reduce that is an important piece as well.
Thank you, Sean. I have one last question, then we're going to close and we're going to move into a little bit of a break time, a 15-minute break. Sean, is there a cost of membership if people want to join AGO? Can you tell us just a little bit about that in closing?
Yeah, so we do have a membership fee. It's designed to be really minimal. If you're a volunteer-led organization, it's $25 a year. If you have paid staff, it's $50. But if you can't afford it, we always waive it. What we want is to know that people find our resources useful. And there are some of our resources that are technically only available to members, but I'll be honest, we don't have any gatekeeping mechanism on that. So we just really want those resources to be available. Joining as a member helps us show funders the need for our resources. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Sean, for being here today and sharing your expertise and your wisdom and spending a part of your day there. I'm a bit jealous. I have snow outside my window and I see some palm trees in your wind outside. I think you're working from outside even. So
yeah. I happen to live in Costa Rica, so I get to enjoy warm weather year round. So.
Good.